If you're like me, you've probably had many wandering thoughts in your life, and one of them could be how on earth did the human species go from hunting deer in the forest to literally trying to conquer Mars? Or, why on earth were forehead piercings invented? But let's not get ahead of ourselves. I've been having this particular question in the back of my mind for a while, and it wasn't until I came upon this Reddit post that it dawned on me. I need to figure out the answer to this if I'm gonna have a good night's sleep again. And that question, guys, is what on earth do movie producers actually do? Like really, what do they do? And this question is really important because it will explain why some Hollywood movies are unbearable to watch and how absurd $200 million budgets get spent. You know those bold eye-catching credits at the start or end of a movie that say executive producer? For some reason, no matter how much we try to ignore them, they always manage to grab our attention. The sound, the feel of it alone carries some kind of weight. Executive producer sounds like the final boss of a video game. Obviously, they play a more important role than the people cleaning the set, the crew, the cast, and even the directors. Now, that may come as a shock to many people because when we talk about filmmaking and filmmakers, we tend to talk more about the actors and directors. We either say, hey, have you watched that movie that Margot Robbie starred in? Or we say, have you watched that new Christopher Nolan movie? He's truly a master filmmaker. We rarely, if ever, talk about the producers, and even actors themselves when talking about the projects they want to work on, usually focus on the directors attached to those films. They never mention producers, and really, no one does. They don't get mentioned at award shows, they don't get mentioned at interviews, they're just the invisible man at the corner staring at everyone. The funny thing is, their job is just as important, probably even more important than everybody else. I'm going to use this analogy to explain what a movie producer really is. You see, a movie producer is like the ringmaster of a chaotic circus in outer space. Okay, that's a terrible analogy, sorry. A movie producer is more like the owner of a restaurant. They're the ones who decide what kind of restaurant this is going to be in the first place. They decide if the vision they have is an original story that will be written by a screenwriter or an adaptation of another piece of work. They also get to decide what type of film or TV show it's going to be. Whether it's a rom-com, an action movie, a space thriller about circus acts, it's their call. And the best example of this is Marvel Studios' Kevin Feige, a figure we all know and love. Well, some of us. Others, not so much. Kevin Feige has been the executive producer for all MCU films, and he has truly cemented his name in Hollywood as a filmmaking legend, and some even call him a genius. After all, he took a franchise that critics claimed was just cinema junk food, a franchise that nobody really thought too much about, and transformed it into a cinema juggernaut, a franchise with several movies collectively grossing over $31 billion, making it the highest grossing film franchise of all time. Kevin Feige has produced every single MCU movie since Iron Man, and his creative input and business acumen has been very integral to the MCU's success. In the early days of the MCU, Kevin set the tone and style for his movies, despite it not being the norm at the time. He wanted to make movies that blended action with humor. People initially scoffed at the idea, questioning whether it would succeed because the Dark Knight trilogy, which was a successful superhero movie at the time, had a deeply serious tone in contrast. And that wasn't the only criticism about the MCU. There were a ton of them, but Kevin wasn't fazed by that, and he made sure to work only with directors and actors that could see his vision, or be blinded enough by the money not to complain. And we can all see the results of that. His movies have been massive hits making billions of dollars. A producer is responsible for this extremely crucial part of the filmmaking process. But that's not always the case. You see, sometimes a director can have the vision for a story, so they are the ones who set the tone, style, genre, you name it. A good example of this would be Christopher Nolan with his latest film, Oppenheimer. Christopher wasn't an executive producer for the Oppenheimer movie. However, he was the one who thought of the idea for the movie and was the visionary of the movie. So being the visionary of a movie isn't a producer's only job, and sometimes it's not even their job at all. A movie producer is also in charge of budget management, and this is probably their biggest role. The producers are the guys who look at the film or TV show and determine the budget that would best meet its needs, realistically. Then, they're in charge of getting those resources. If we use our restaurant analogy, they control the costs, making sure the steak is of the highest quality, without breaking the budget on fancy plates. Cause let's be honest, nobody really cares about those. This role is so important that it could be the number one deciding factor in a movie's success, or failure. And there's loads of examples of that. In the 90s, producer John Peters was famously attached to his project Superman Lives, but maybe a bit too attached. You see, Peters insisted on very strange and expensive things, like insisting Superman fight a giant spider. I don't know about you, but that sounds like it came straight out of Powerpuff Girls. Apparently, his creative extravagance and his budget weren't exactly matching. Development costs for the movie ballooned into millions, and mind you, that's development costs, not production costs. Obviously, development costs are way more now because of our friend inflation, but back then, that was a whole lot. This led Tim Burton, the director at the time, to leave the project, and as you can imagine, it was a downward spiral from there. And this resulted in the movie never even being made. And when everyone began asking like, why aren't we getting the Superman movie? The studio and producers simply said, financial reasons. A more recent example of this is from the famed DCEU. You know, the same DCEU that got scrapped last year after like 8 years of build-up, but let's not get into that right now. Actually, it's one of its first movies, and that movie is the 2017 Justice League. As the head of Warner Bros. At the time, Kevin Tsujihara insisted on rushing the Justice League movie into theaters to meet the company's end-of-year goals, and maybe catch up on Marvel in the process. But you absolutely cannot rush a good movie. These insane deadlines led to extensive reshoots, tonal inconsistencies, especially after the departure of Zack Snyder. Yes, for some of you who might not know this, Zack Snyder didn't direct the entirety of the Justice League movie. He had to step down during post-production after his daughter's death. Joss Whedon, I think I'm butchering that name, sorry about that, but he completed the film as an uncredited co-director, cause DCEU executive producers cannot just wait for Zack to recover from his grief. Obviously, these kind of director changes never end well for the movie, cause each director has their own distinct artistic vision. Bringing in someone else to finish the work of another director is just a one-way ticket to mess up a movie. Of course, the executives at DC have every right to do this, and in theory, it is a smart business decision, but in reality, what was the result? The film grossed $657 million globally on a budget of $300 million after you factor in marketing, which is just so absurd now that I think about it. 300M. For this movie? Anyway, it was lower than what they were expecting for a movie of that kind of hype. Have in mind, this was a time when Marvel was getting box office hit after hit for half the budget. Another example of producer mismanagement absolutely screwing up a movie is the Borderlands movie. That movie was unbelievably bad and was a box office disaster. And a huge part of that was because of the producers. The producers decided that famous actors were more important than literally everything else. They brought in a director known mainly for his horror films to direct a sci-fi movie. The movie went through nearly a decade of development hell with multiple changes in both writers and directors, and we all know how bad just a single change can be. And considering that this cost well over $100 million to make, I'm beginning to wonder how all that money was spent, because it definitely did not go to special effects and VFX, or even hiring good writers. Just kidding, I'm not wondering at all, I know exactly where it went. Let's see. Apparently, the salary of the main cast is literally more than the film's entire gross. Like, that is not even a joke. Kevin Hart was reportedly paid $20 million for his role as Roland, Cate Blanchett was paid $10 million, Jamie Lee Curtis is said to have gotten $3 million, Jack Black $4 million, and then Ariana Greenblatt $1 million. Altogether, that's $38 million in just the salaries of the main cast, for a movie that has no prior franchise recognition. At least as far as movies go. That is just wild. When you factor in marketing and other post-production, what is left of the budget? I mean, really, what's left? And having a star-studded cast isn't a bad thing. It has huge benefits, but other things take higher priority. And with that said, Borderlands is the perfect encapsulation of what happens when producers mismanage the budget of a film. Well, now that we have a good idea of who producers are and how important they are, I think this is a good time to tell you that there are actually different types of producers. Producers carry a lot of responsibility, and because of that, more often than not, there are usually more than one of them on a project. There can be up to 2, 3, 10, even 15 working on a project simultaneously. An example of this is The Irishman, which had up to 15 producers who were credited. There are the executive producers producers. These guys are usually the big shots. They usually oversee the financial and business aspects of a production. They might not be involved in the day-to-day production, but they secure funding and they're the ones tasked with managing those ungodly Hollywood budgets. They may also be involved in deciding what the production is going to be creatively, what material they're going to adapt, what director they're going to hire. But this isn't always the case, and sometimes they just leave it to the producers and directors to just figure that one out. And we've already discussed a few of them, such as Kevin Feige and John Peters. The producer. Think of it like this. If the executive producer was the restaurant owner, the producer is the general manager who oversees the day-to-day operations. The producer is involved in every aspect of the film, from pre-production all the way down to post-production. That's a lot of responsibility. An example of this is Kathleen Kennedy. Kennedy is a major figure in Lucasfilm because she has overseen the production of some of the biggest Star Wars hits. So remember how the executive producer is the restaurant owner, while the producer is more like the general manager? Well, the line producer is like the assistant manager. I want you to think of the restaurant as more of a restaurant chain now, with several branches. The executive producer has other branches to oversee, so they just come in once in a while to say hi and just see how things are going. The general manager is in charge of running that branch every day and making big decisions that could impact it. Meanwhile, the assistant manager focuses more on logistics, resource allocation, and execution. The line producer in a production is rarely ever involved in big creative or financial decisions. They're the ones who ensure the makeup artists are on set every day. They supervise the lighting crew and make sure half of an actor's face isn't darker than the other half. In short, their job is to handle the immediate practical needs of the production. And there are many other types of producers. There's co-producers who work with the producers and handle specific aspects of production, like marketing maybe. There's also associate producers, supervising producers, production managers, creative producers, etc. There are so many that if we decided to talk about all of them, this video could possibly be an hour long. That said, depending on the size and nature of the project, a movie or TV show could have several types of producers or just one. It all depends. A movie like Avatar: Way of Water could easily have like 13 producers on it, but a small indie film could have just one. As we've seen, producers are extremely important to movies and TV shows, and it's crazy how they don't get talked about nearly enough. If you liked this video, give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel as you'll be helping the channel grow. And you'd also be validating the hours upon hours I used in creating this video. Anyway, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.